My name is Patrick Bergen. I'm with the Internal Revenue Service, Office of Information Technology Acquisition. Can everyone hear me? We're good? Wonderful. I want to thank you for coming out in the afternoon. I know it's been a long day of sessions, and hopefully everyone's not too tired, and we can have a little bit of a back and forth discussion relative to elevating the program manager and IT acquisitions. As I said, my name is Patrick Bergen. I work for the IRS. My current role is Deputy Director. I handle all of the IRS hardware, software, and telecommunications purchases from an acquisition standpoint. I'm a contracting officer by trade. I also handle all of those types of acquisitions for the departmental offices of Treasury. I have with me today David Parrish, who is one of my customers, and actually, in full disclosure, a former contracting officer who worked for IRS for many years before he went over to the program side. So between the two of us, we have a little bit of a unique perspective on the roles of a program manager and the roles of a contracting officer. In addition to my duties as a contracting officer earlier in my career, I was also in charge from a program management standpoint of one of our large IDIQ programs that handled support services for all of the IRS. And I had to get into a lot of the program management functions of that, including the recompete of those contracts, both from the contracting side and from the PM side, because we own our own program. David, if you want to.
Sure. Again, my name is David Parrish. I currently work in IRS for the Office of Online Services, and so this is all web application development and creating new taxpayer services directly through our online channel. As Patrick said, previously I was a CO, so obviously I have a lot of acquisition experience, but I also have sort of an IT, project manager hat that I wear currently, and I also look for very creative contracting solutions for new digital applications and services. So we thought the two of us could have a nice banter and hopefully could answer any questions you guys have relating to the role and the sort of the friction between a program manager and a contracting officer.
All right, and as we get started, I know traditionally we would go through slide deck and the rest of it and then have questions at the end. It was our intention to have a little bit more of an interactive session as we talk back and forth on our different takes on program manager versus CO responsibilities. And we encourage, if you have any questions, just shoot your hand up. We'll take them as we go along. That way you don't lose your train of thought, and so it's still relevant to what we're discussing at the time. As you look at a role of a program manager within IT acquisitions, I think it's very important to understand where each side is coming from. And I think there's been a lot of push, and when we were given the topic for this presentation, we were asked to look at some specific things along whether we thought that the program manager was not being valued enough, and then look at different types of agency structures to see which ones were better for the program manager and which ones put them in a worse position, and how they overlap with some of your contracting officer responsibilities.
And conversely, how the contracting officer and the role of procurement is sometimes underutilized or undervalued in the program management approach. Procurement's sort of always viewed as an afterthought and is brought in to execute a contract in action, as opposed to being part of the discussion early on and strategizing about how to get something done. Absolutely.
As we have a new senior procurement executive, or not really new anymore, she's been here for a little over a year. As our SPE is fond of saying, acquisitions is a team sport. That means that your contracting officers and the people in procurement are not those paper pushers who are keeping you from having what you really need and what you really want. And our program managers and our customers are not just looking to give it to the incumbent vendor and not trying to do something that is inappropriate. We all have a mission and an ultimate end user that we're servicing. And what needs to happen is, through collaboration, you need to understand what the roles are. So as I look at a program manager within IT, first and foremost, he or she is responsible for delivering on their program. I'm a contracting officer. That's what I get up in the morning, and that's what I do. And to me, that's the most important thing. I am a small piece of what goes into that program manager's toolbox as far as being able to deliver what they need to deliver. As we look at IT acquisitions, it gets a little bit more complicated. The regulations get a little bit larger. The last session was talking about agile development and all of the new ways in which you can meet your goals. But what the acquisition community needs to understand, in contracting officers as well, is My job is to get my program managers what they need. I need to get it for them legally. It may not be how you thought you wanted it, but you tell me where you want me to get you to, and that's where I'm going to drive you to, and I'm going to give you advice on how that should happen. And
to add on that, I mean, I think it's important that early on, and obviously, a big thing from both sides is the sooner the sooner that a PM and a CO can get together and collaborate and put a strategy together, the better off everyone will be. I think an important point to what Patrick's talking about is aligning priorities, right? So he said, the CO wants to get the PM what they need in order to execute their job. The PM similarly wants to make sure they don't have a break in service, that it can, or that the services or support can be delivered by a specific date. So I think aligning the two positions to a sort of a common set of goals is important early on in order to get everybody on the same page. Because time and time again, it'll be, the PM will say, well, I need this as soon as possible. I don't care what the FAR is. I don't care what hoops you have to jump through. I don't understand why I can't just get what I want. And obviously, different agencies have different problems, and every PM has a varying understanding of the FAR, right? So a political appointees may not, care what the FAR is, where you may have a seasoned 30-plus, SES who knows it and doesn't care, or thinks that that's the CO's problem and he needs to figure it out. So aligning everybody to a common set of goals or a common, finish line that everyone's driving toward, I think is an important part of putting the pieces together.
Absolutely. So along the same lines, when we're discussing teaming up in acquisitions as a team sport, earlier involvement from your acquisitions or from your procurement office helps. Now, I'm going to go a little bit different than what some of your contracting officers or procurement officers might tell you. We don't need to be involved in every meeting that starts off, nor do you probably want us there. You don't need to be involved in every meeting from an acquisition side where I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to include the clauses and cost and pricing and how I'm going to do it and get it done from my expertise. What you do want to do is an early reach out and a checkpoint and have somebody within your procurement office that you can talk to, preferably somebody in the area in which this is going to be bought, so you can bounce ideas off at an early stage. Because if you're going down a path to completely set up an acquisition strategy and then throw it over the fence, as it were, to procurement, sometimes that's going to work. Sometimes you're going to have thought of all the pitfalls and the rest of it, but earlier engagement is going to help you more.
Not to mention keeping the business and the IT folks on the right side of meetings and interactions with contractors. I think the last group briefly sort of talked about, not giving anyone a competitive advantage. Working with procurement and a seasoned CO will educate the customer that, look, you can't necessarily take this meeting with this contractor for them to propose a solution they're ultimately going to propose in a formal RFP, because you may be giving them additional information, you may be setting yourself up for a protest. And obviously, if an executive or an IT program manager hasn't had a lot of experience with procurement or executing or administering contracts, they don't understand all the rules, right? So and Patrick and I have a lot of different stories we could probably tell with no names, but we've seen everything from an IT program manager working closely with an incumbent to the point where the incumbent assisted in developing the requirements, which is a big no-no. And because there was sort of a gap between that program manager and his contracting officer, even during administration, it resulted in them opening themselves up for protests, and down the road, actually, the program manager had to be reassigned because of the proximity of him and the contractor's relationship. So it's important from an IT PM perspective, to protect yourself and communicate effectively to avoid some of those early pitfalls that set the program up for failure down the road.
So just to understand our audience, and as we go into the presentation or as we go into our talk, where we're going to drive to, unless the audience would like something different, is there's been a lot of talk around agile and around formal enterprise lifecycle and what's best for program versus contracting officer, and those are some of the questions we're going to go into, unless you want to see something different. show of hands, who falls on the program/customer side of the house from where they're working? All right? And who falls on the acquisition side from the contracting officers? All right, so about half and half. So you can't make fun of the COs, and I can't make fun of the
Does anybody fall under oversight? Just curious.
There'll be a separate briefing for you outside. Now, oversight is good, helps us keep on the straight and narrow. And I say that right into the camera that's right there.
Yeah.
As we were looking at this, one of the pushes, I believe, for the conference and some of the breakout sessions that we've seen is formalized process around how you do IT acquisitions. And we were given some questions and some information on which way they'd like us to drive the conversation. When we're talking about agile development and different ways to get an IT project through enterprise lifecycle, it's not necessarily always related right to the acquisition itself. In some cases, agencies are fortunate enough to have IT programmers who can take projects from start to finish with little or no assistance from the vendors. In other cases, it's the vendors who are running it all for you. I'm very fortunate at the IRS to have a very robust enterprise lifecycle, very well documented. We are looking at doing a lot more iterative, a lot more agile development projects, but there's a little bit of a downfall to that as far as agile does not mean there are no rules. And it does not mean that you make them up as you go along or that you can just do it quicker and expedite each one of those milestones. It's a thought-through process. It has its own rules. You need to follow it, as I'm sure you've heard from other speakers as we go through. We need to make sure that we're applying that to the appropriate acquisitions, and forget the acquisition side of it, to your programs, to your projects that need to be done, whether the development or the DME lends itself to that type of development cycle is really a customer-driven, along with input from the various stakeholders.
No, absolutely. I think the important thing, no matter what framework you're using or what process is going to be implemented, I mean, from an acquisition perspective, it's effectively conveying the requirements in the solicitation. If you're going to go straight waterfall, or you're going to do agile, or you're going to do some kind of hybrid, it's effectively relating the requirements inside the statement of work, and then obviously ensuring that you're evaluating the contractor has previous experience related to that path, right? So what we've seen a lot of is as we try and do pilots and we try and do agile development and we bring contractors on, some contractors have agile experience and they have documented projects and products that they've ran through an agile approach successfully, and then there's other ones who say they do. And trying to evaluate proposals to adequately reflect what you need on the back end is really where the program manager's focus should be is, look, if we have a framework that we're going to follow, how can we effectively convey that in a statement of work or a statement of objectives or performance work statement, whatever you want to call, whatever you want to use, to effectively evaluate that contractor to then deliver and then manage that contractor on a contract administration plan to execute those things. Because, you know, if you pitch one idea and then say, oh, well, the CIO changed his mind, and now we need to go down another path, you're in essence violating the scope of the award.
Unless you write the scope a little bit broader.
Yeah.
So as we transition into some of the portions of this, I think it's a good segue to go into the actual roles and responsibilities from my perspective, a contracting officer, and David's from a program manager. I will say this up front. The qualities that make a good contracting officer are the same qualities that make a good program manager, and a lot of times is the reason why they butt heads. Good contracting officers and good program managers are used to being in control, running their programs, running their projects, and taking accountability for what's happening. And then you get two people who are used to that role, butting heads as far as where is the line between what is your responsibility and what is mine. At the purest sense, from the contracting officer standpoint, we're responsible for running your acquisition, making sure that we have a proper competition, sole source, whatever methodology we're going to use, protecting the integrity of that procurement. And that means our cost and price analysis, that means past performance, that means overseeing and making sure that the tech eval, when we do a quality review, that we're not doing things that we can't do, and to be your business advisor as far as what the rules and regulations are around that procurement.
And preventing conflicts of interest.
And preventing conflicts of interest, and I believe it was in the last session they were talking about keeping industry at an arm's length. us within the acquisition community have a tendency to don't talk to the contractors. There's no way I can control and make sure that I have a fair environment if they're too involved with it. Where in a lot of cases in the upfront part, you need their input, you need the market research, you need the industry buy-in to figure out what the best way is to do it. And we need to recognize that more. COs can help you show where that line is. As far as, I'd like to do market research, is this really market research or am I allowing them to drive requirements? The CO's role is to provide you input as far as what is allowable and what isn't. I sit on numerous conference calls, just listening, or just providing a little bit of backstop as far as now you're starting to go into an area you shouldn't. That's my role as a CO, to provide you that guidance and that business advice and to keep you out of trouble. From a program manager side, and then David can jump in and tell me where I've messed this all up. You're in charge of giving us your requirements and telling us what you actually want us to buy, defining it, working with us to put in place performance metrics that measure things that you actually care about. I get a lot of different requirements in where the customer looks at me and says, can you just put the normal performance metrics on that and we'll make it a nice performance work statement because that's what we're supposed to do these days and everything will be good. In most cases, sure, I can. I've done it a bunch. I know how to write to different metrics and different service level agreements and all the rest of that. But if you're not telling me what's important to you, I may be incentivizing the entirely wrong thing. So with our milestone exit reviews under our normal enterprise life cycle, we hold milestone exit reviews once a month. And it takes special permission to get outside of that cycle, and it doesn't normally happen. So if I incentivize a contractor to deliver 2 weeks early, there is literally no benefit to the government for being 2 weeks early because they're going to have to wait the full 2 weeks until they'll hold the MER next. And if I don't understand that from the customer side and the PM side to know it's a value, 30 days as early is a value. 29 days I can't get on schedule. And then I'm still going to lose that month. So for a contracting officer, that's where my job lies. I take your requirements. They don't have to be perfect. They shouldn't be. Contracting officers also need to get out of the habit of your customers are going to provide you with 100% requirements. In a lot of cases, our cores and even our program managers, acquisitions is not what they primarily do. What they primarily do is deliver systems or oversee a certain application or run the operations and maintenance. That's their full-time job. We provide you that assistance. Program management from your end?
I mean, so especially IT program management can be somewhat complicated, especially if you're trying to translate requirements from the business need into IT jargon and then over into procurement, into a procurement language. Sometimes things get lost in translation, where you're trying to accommodate a business need into heavily defined IT requirements, but then also trying to work within the procurement structure and abiding by the FAR. I mean, to Patrick's point about interacting with contractors, there's some times where the interaction with a contractor is absolutely necessary in order to get to an end result you need. So an example of that might be integrating with legacy systems, where you need to meet with the vendors who currently operate your infrastructure in order to understand how a new product or a new service or some kind of new piece is going to fit into this very complex puzzle, right? So a lot of the stuff we do with new online services that are trying to be developed is it has to work within our irs.gov portal. So we have to meet with that vendor and discuss how things will operate and how things will function, because we don't want to necessarily procure something on the back end that is completely, non-compatible. So you have to work with procurement to identify how you can interact with the right contractors in a way that doesn't jeopardize the procurement. So maybe that's conflict of interest firewall. Maybe that's getting a signed notarized letter from the contractor saying that they won't propose on any subsequent procurements, but not being completely hands-off with industry, because it could set you up for a major issue down the road. A lot of the program management pitfalls are early on planning, not accounting for the time it's going to take to do the procurement, right? So a lot of people, constantly I hear PMs who say, well, I need this done in 3 months, and they haven't even called procurement yet, when procurement should have been in the upfront, milestone 0 planning to make sure that they're built into a roadmap and a schedule, and then obviously funding is ready to go. So I mean, I think you're sort of a program manager, especially in IT, because I know it was related to IT acquisitions. You're sometimes stuck in the middle, and it's not all, you got the pressure of the business pushing you. You have procurement that is often viewed as an obstacle to get to where you want to go to, as opposed to a partner or a teammate. So,
And often we deserve that reputation.
sometimes.
And that's, I think we all need to be a little bit honest about our shortcomings. Within procurement, we can sometimes be a little bit more of a roadblock than we should be. And as a customer, maybe you're sometimes a little bit less helpful than you should be. And we need to work through some of those as part of our roles and responsibilities to be able to get it done properly.
And I think a big part of it is effectively communicating what some of the constraints are, right? So there's obviously mandates that are put in place, whether it's small business goals or restrictions on certain type of procurements that need to be effectively related to the PM, as far as when it's decided what vehicle to use or what type of acquisition to go after. It shouldn't, neither the PM nor the CO should say, look, this is how it's going to be, and you just have to deal with it. It should be more of a, collaborative discussion to get into the same place. And if the program manager or their executive or what have you feels strongly about a specific type of acquisition or a specific path, and they're willing to go to a senior procurement executive or some kind of oversight to negotiate that, then I think everybody needs to work together to get, to go that route until it's either approved or denied.
A couple other responsibilities I want to touch on is program managers typically oversee everyone who's working on the acquisition. So in a lot of cases, we won't deal directly with the program manager as the CO. We'll deal with your core, your tech POC, or your tech chairperson. I understand PM's desire to stay intimately involved, but if you're not going to be on the tech team, or you're going to try to keep at a higher level, trust your folks. You put them there for a reason. Trust that they're going to do what you think what they believe is in the best interest of the government, and that you put the right people on it. If you're sitting there going and you're worried about who you put on the project, you might want to rethink your selection of personnel. But too often, as we talk about roles and responsibilities, it's the PM, the core, or the PM and the CO. Lost in that is your core, your tech chairperson or your tech POC, who you should be empowering to do the legwork because they're the proper person to be working it, and you should be supporting them as they come to you with issues and as we need to get things through. Another role and responsibility that's going to be on both the CO and the PM as you look forward in what you're doing, from my perspective, is strategic sourcing. So as we look at what we're doing and how we're doing it within the government, I know at least at the IRS and Department of Treasury, one of the things that you're going to be asked to do as a PM or a CO is not just look at your acquisition in a vacuum. The developmental services that you're getting, the hardware, the software you're buying, whatever that IT acquisition is, we need to be looking across the board to make sure that we're leveraging our spending power, whether that's using GSA and federal contracts, or whether that's doing it at your department level or an agency level. But we need to stop buying, 100 laptops at a clip here or there, and using sourcing vehicles. One, it makes life easier for procurement staff, who we're all on staffing issues across the federal government. I don't think it's going to get that much better. But you need to be looking at working with your various IT organizations and your sourcing folks from both the program side and the contracting side to make sure that you're leveraging the proper vehicles. And if we can get larger vehicles in place and quicker ordering processes, it will help you as a PM as you go forward and be able to respond to your customers quicker, because now you're not looking at a 6-month lead time for a major acquisition. Now you're looking at a 6-week mini competition against a multiple award BPA along those lines.
And to Patrick's earlier point, I think as a PM, you need to make a decision how much you want to be involved, right? Like, it's not either 100 or 0%, but it needs to be either you're going to be very hands-on, you're going to be part of the tech chair, you're going to be the tech chair, you're going to be part of the evaluation team, are you going to be the source selection authority? What role are you going to have in overseeing this project? Do you have a qualified core? Do you have a qualified technical person, or are you going to be all of the above? Because I think obviously, knowing what your commitment level is and conveying that commitment level to the CEO is going to be most effective in making sure you are looped in, making sure that you are part of these discussions, or that you're handing it off and that's somebody's job under you, and then they're on the hook. I think effectively, you know, I've seen it happen frequently where you have PMs who sort of, you know, jump in, jump out, or executives for that matter, who want to come at the end of an acquisition and be that authority to make that decision when they haven't effectively been part of the process. So they may not fully understand the requirements. They may not understand, you know, they may have had no part in the evaluation. And so when it comes down to the decision, other people are trying to educate you as to what the pros and cons of each vendor are, and then you're supposed to make a decision that's minorly informed.
So we have some points of discussion we're going to go through, unless there's some areas from the audience that you would like us to address specifically. Which would be a whole lot more interesting than what I got for you here. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Let's add a layer of complexity to the problem, because I take it that IRS Treasury is a relatively mature organization. I work
Depends on
at
the day.
DHS. I mean, well, you guys are better than DHS, believe me. I work specifically at Customs and Border Protection, and when we were set up, we had a real problem where the project office would hire gunslinger contractors for $300 an hour and use them as consultants. And of course, they just didn't advise on the project management aspect. They advised on contract methodologies, procedures, things like that. And that's basically what that's what they were being paid to do by the project office. And we had real contradictions, real arguments. I'm not going to say the advice was good or bad, but procedurally it caused some real problems, because actually the incentive on the part of the project manager is to believe it's $300 an hour consultant rather than some GS 1102, and that's a cultural problem. And so I want to say that I understand that there's always this conflict, the inherent conflict, but the project officer's nightmare is the contracting officer is going to hijack his program, going to award to somebody he doesn't want, and all that kind of stuff. Now, the thing is that, have you guys seen anything as bad as that in your experience?
Sure.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to the extent that I've heard stories of DHS, and I have family members who work over there and friends who work in various components of it. But we often see where you have a vendor who is more intimately involved than they should be. In a lot of cases, it ends up being our incumbent. It ends up being a program management vendor that was brought in to help you run your project, and they start crossing the lines. From our perspective, the way we handle it at the IRS is to OCI, Organizational Conflict of Interest, firewall off the vendor if possible. And if not, we bar them from bidding. So DHS or whoever ends up getting the $300 an hour, very high-end price tag for your vendors, you can take advice from anywhere, and they can help write the requirements. What they can't do is, after you help write the requirements, you can't bid it. You can't be on the team that bids it, because now you've violated competition. And that's the portion that you start to see as you go through. And have we had problems with it? Sure. Have we gone down paths that we may not have wanted to go down? Sure. And frankly, some of that gets involved with the RIG. And from roles and responsibilities on the PM side or the CO side, if you believe something is being done wrong, and I don't mean this shouldn't be fixed price, it should be cost reimbursement, and I don't mean that I'd like to reevaluate my factors. If you believe something is being done wrong in terms of this isn't legal or this is inappropriate, I encourage you, it doesn't matter what your role is, that's where you seek out whatever your independent avenues are, whether that's your inspector general, whether that's your management chain, however you choose to handle it, but put your hand up. Because too often in acquisitions, oh, well, somebody must know what these guys are doing. It's all fine. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But that's where you have to stand up and be good stewards of the taxpayer funds, which is what's drilled into me as a contracting officer. I should spend the taxpayers' dollars the same way I spend my own money. And if I was getting, high-priced advice, and, the guy I'm getting to give me the assessment on the architecture is also the one who's bidding it, who's also the one who's doing my collection of all the debris, and I'm only getting one quote for all that, do I really think I'm getting the best price for that project at my house? So, I mean, I don't know if you have any.
Well, yeah, I mean, to your point about the paranoia, about that the CO is going to hijack the procurement, or you're going to end up with a vendor you don't want.
It's because we are.
Yeah. I think a lot of that has to do with effective communication and education about the procurement process. I mean, when I was a CO, and we would brief different executives and try like this sort of procurement 101 general education process, a lot of it was around, sort of saying, look, your people come in, they do an evaluation. The ratings are then, against the requirements that you developed. They're evaluated by your people, and the result is going to be a pretty straightforward result. I mean, obviously, if it's low cost technically acceptable, it's very straightforward. If it's best value, it's still, if you have vendors who both, two vendors that get the same high score, then it's going to go to price as a decision. But I think if it's effectively communicated as, look, procurement isn't making the decision, your folks are making the decision, then executing the information that is provided, the program office is much more comfortable to understand their role versus procurement's role in working an acquisition together. As far as the other part of your comment around advice of consultants, stuff like at high levels, I mean, that's a constant sort of, or not constant, but it happens frequently as far as advice they're getting and the role of procurement. Like I said, very often it is an afterthought. I'm in a lot of meetings with IT executives where, they'll say, oh, well, we want to do this big recompete of this big contract. And I say, oh, have you talked to procurement? Have you identified a CO? Has anything been done around the planning? And they say, no, we'll get to them in a year. And you know what I mean? Where it's way after the fact. Whether they have high-priced contractors, or maybe it's even an FFRDC that's advising them, they feel as though they don't need that expertise early on in the process. Sort of what Patrick talked about is, procurement doesn't need to be at every, IPT meeting of any project that goes forward, but it just needs to be part of the conversation and not forgotten about and dealt with as an afterthought. So I guess you're always going to have those issues about contractors advising high-level executives in the direction of they think things should go, or ideas about where it should go. But there needs to be an active stakeholder outreach by the procurement organization to effectively
There's a way to
mitigate
do
that.
it. There's a way to do it, and there's a value to it, but you need to make sure you do it properly and they don't overstep. One thing just to contradict David, because that's part of what I love doing. Your contracting officer is going to make a source selection decision, or the source selection authority is going to make it. But to David's point, there's a lot of input that happens through the tech panel, which the program manager is either on and leading, or they have their folks on, which is why I made the point earlier of you need to trust your folks or make sure you have the right ones on that team.
And it shouldn't, and a technical evaluation committee should not be made up of, the people that have nothing better to do, stuck in a room reading proposals for 3 weeks. It needs to be people who understand the project, understand the systems, understand the implications of what the project is meant to do to truly evaluate and rate each vendor. Because, I mean, one of my old mentors always used to say, garbage in, garbage out. Or another famous quote was, if you want it bad, you get it bad. So the quality of the people that are on the evaluation committee will directly reflect in what the contractor ends up delivering.
And I would say, can we at least agree that the role of the contracting officer is to ensure the financial integrity and legal sufficiency of the contract he or she signs? Because that person is individually responsible with a name. That's why they have the warrant.
Yep.
And
They come back after me, after I sign, whether I still work for that agency or not. That is my liability, which is also why I
Exactly.
take out a separate insurance policy as a federal employee to protect myself, because at the end of the day, when I sign it, I am certifying that everything that has happened here is above board, and I believe it to be the best business decision. I believe it to be legal.
And that is a serious thing. Thank you very much.
It is.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is also why I always get nervous when, GAO or TIG starts calling. Yes, sir.
Yes, from the CO perspective and just acquisitions, I guess I'm looking for resources, first of all, I'm on the program manager side, but work closely with our cores and sometimes brought in to discuss things with our CO. Let's talk about the cloud. I work for CDC now. We've been doing a lot of work trying to move systems to the cloud. That's been a struggle with some of our COs in how they interpret the FAR. Now, I know that the biggest issues we've had with the way they have explained it to me, and I've gone out and discussed with some people about the tech FAR, the new the tech FAR. But I plan to take that back because I talked to somebody while I've been here about that. But the biggest thing that they've been saying is because cloud services are commodity, that commodity should be fixed, firm fixed price, a contract from the standpoint of the government perspective, and that's been a problem to try to get past that.
Yeah.
What advice can you provide on that?
So this is where, from a contracting officer standpoint, you get a little frustrated with people within your own field too, because here's one of the biggest frustrations program managers, our customers have is, I can ask 3 different CEOs the same question, and I'm going to get 3 different answers, and you're all going to tell me it's because of the FAR. How is that possible? And what it comes down to is interpretation around regulations and how you should do it. So from my standpoint, I can understand where they're saying that cloud computing, as far as commodity and trying to firm fixed price, everything that you can. And what I would say to them, or what I would advise is, yes, when we're in a steady state cloud environment, then yes, that may be a fixed price contract where I know what my ins and outs are, I know what my historical usage is, I know how much I'm pushing to it. But the process of getting me to my server-based, mainframe-based environment, where I have all of it now, to the cloud, and securing that, and troubleshooting all of the areas that I need to troubleshoot, that is not a known commodity. And contract type is all about risk assignment. And contracting officers will love to tell you that we're in charge of picking contract type and we have to. If we do it in a vacuum, we're making a mistake. It's risk assignment. A contractor will give you a fixed price
For anything.
proposal for going to the cloud. You are not going to like that price.
Well, and
Cost
that-
reimbursement, on the other hand, and the advice, I'll let Dave, actually, if you want to jump in, but the advice I would give is, you need to explain to them what portions of the technical side the contractors can't know, and therefore need to be on a cost reimbursement or a T&M basis. I personally don't like T&M, I prefer cost reimbursement, but that aside, what portions of those from a technical side are unknowns? What portions of those are going to be things that come up? Is there a component that you can fix price? Does it check the box for them? Because when we're looking at high-risk contracting, 51% of the contract is fixed price, then therefore we classify it as fixed price. It still gives you 49% that's cost reimbursement. Can you get worked into that film or that stance, or can you break up the procurement so you're doing, hey, listen, we're going to do 2 years to get us to a steady state,
And
or
then
get us to a more position where we can get fixed price, but it's going to be an uphill battle for you. I mean, that's,
When especially, I mean, I think one of the trickiest things, and we're actually working an issue now, but one of the trickiest things about moving to the cloud, and the FedRAMP certification and everything that's part of that is even for a known commodity, like I'll just pick one, like emails, right? Like we know we could virtualize email, and for every email it would be X number of cents. There's still the front end piece of building the cloud and then integrating the cloud, which in some instances is unknown as far as how big of a rollout, when do we roll out, how many systems need to be integrated, how complex are those integrations, and trying to articulate the complexity of these integration against legacy systems, which in some of the IRS cases are very, very old, in order to try and get a fixed price for that piece of the work. The contractor is going to overinflate to manage their risk, and you're going to pay a lot more than it would cost if you said, okay, look, for the integration piece and the setup, or what Patrick said about the first 2 years, the build, the integration, the cybersecurity checks, we're going to do cost plus, and then when we get to the back end of the known commodity, and then we want to see what your fixed price per X transaction, whether it's a virtualized server, whether it's email or live chat, applications or whatever the case may be, there's a proper way to do it. And all in compliance with the FAR is mitigating your risk as an agency or entity from what is known versus what is unknown. Because the more that is unknown from the contractor's perspective, the higher the cost is going to be.
And just on your example, a couple other ideas for you as you go back to talk to your CO. We've done in the past, and we actually did this, I wanted to go cost reimbursement, and I was being pushed to say that we need to fix price it, because fixed pricing everything is a push, and it's a little bit of a pendulum. Right now, we need to know what our costs are going to be, and wouldn't it be great to have vendors pay us one set rate, and we'll know they'll have a profit margin. Wait 10 years, and the conversation is going to be, wouldn't it be great just to pay them what it actually costs to do this, plus a smaller profit margin for the vendor? But right now, we're on the fixed price side. If you can convince the CO to release your solicitation both ways, to be able to show the price difference between fixed price and cost reimbursement, we've actually used that successfully to be able to show where a proposal nearly doubled. And then we've had the vendors, as part of their proposal, come back and show us with their basis of estimate what the cost delta was and why they couldn't adequately price it and where their risk lies. So that in a lot of cases, you don't have the resources to argue with procurement or argue a point. Sometimes you can use the vendor community to do it because they're going to want the appropriate type of contract to go out. And then the other thing we've used very successfully when we're having environments such as this is we'll have a vendor bid to a set number of hours based on a cost reimbursement benchmarking. So let's say we believe it's going to take you 10,000 hours. They'll give us the labor mix that they believe, and we'll evaluate on that cost principle. And to transition that from a cost type to a fixed price type, we'll issue work requests against that subtask. And that work request, we'll write it into the contract where it can either be fixed price or cost. A lot of times what we end up doing is, vendor, we want you to come in and do this part of the development. And we're going to write you a work request for 2 months so you can get in, see everything, touch it, come up with our plan. We can tweak what we're going to talk about. And then the last 10 months that we write the work request for, that's fixed price. And we get to it in different ways, but it also prevents the inflation on the price proposal, because you'd be fine with a fixed priced order, except for it's going to probably cost you 2 to 3 times for the cloud environment that you're talking about. Because while it's commodity, it's not known for the government and the transition.
And I would say another idea, if you have the lead time, is request for information has been successful in the past. But again, it's going to add a couple months to your acquisition timeline. But it's a nice way to, similar to what Patrick was talking about, of inviting the interested vendor community into a room almost like this, where you could detail the systems or detail additional information that maybe doesn't jump off the page in a statement of work, get some feedback, discuss. I mean, again, the only downside of an RFI is that vendors are very reluctant to communicate too much in an open forum, but it is a nice way to sort of get some feedback about what you're thinking, what they're thinking, maybe what's possible, and some different ideas in different directions that maybe you hadn't thought of.
Other questions? How are we doing on time?
45.
What was this?
5 o'clock.
15 more minutes, okay. So let's touch on a couple topics, and then I don't think we're going to run straight till 5, because at the end of the day, and I don't want people, throwing fruit at me up here. So, David, any of these you want to touch on first, or?
Preconceived roles. I mean, one of the topics that we got was preconceived roles of PM and CO. We sort of talked about it a little bit, but the program manager is often sort of directed and empowered to say, look, you are the owner. This is on you. End to end, you got to get this done. And a lot of, and I think to one of Patrick's earlier points is the program manager is, typically a type A personality of anybody who's telling me no is in my way. And a lot of times procurement is viewed as an obstacle, not an assistance. And I think, again, part of it is the way in which you approach the issue, the way in which you approach the acquisition, and effectively partnering up, and not saying that, okay, well, if I give if I agree that the CO has some decision-making, that doesn't necessarily limit me or limit the program or put us at risk. And I think a lot of program managers Also suffer from the perspective that once the acquisition is awarded, I don't need procurement, which is completely false. Almost every contract I've ever worked on from either side has required multiple modifications for one reason or another. Not to mention constant, or not constant, but frequent sort of communication around an invoice, around receipt and acceptance of goods, around the ending of a contract and an eventual transition, or even, especially when we talked about IT acquisitions, the importance of a QASP, or quality assurance surveillance plan, and executing that, and weighting it, and evaluating the contractor, and ensuring that everything is done in compliance with the contract. It needs to be a ongoing partnership, not a sort of a one-time teaming up. So I did want to sort of emphasize that.
All right, so one of the last things I think we wanted to touch on was, within many of the agencies, we have formal enterprise life cycles, and we have formalized ways of doing it, and then in other agencies, we don't. Does anyone work in an agency where there is no formalized process for your IT development? All right, so this may be this is something they asked us to touch on, as far as whether the formalized process lends itself to creating a better environment for PMs and COs to share responsibilities. And what I would say is, it depends on how you're formalized and how your enterprise lifecycle runs, how the agile is being treated and implemented, and it's not just this time-saving mechanism. When you understand exactly how your development lifecycle should run, you understand ways to make it better and communicate that through. I think one of the biggest mistakes from a contracting side that we don't do well is, we need to understand the customer's business and exactly what they're going through, and understand your life cycle. So one of the requests that I always have of my PMs is, as things change in Agile and the rest of this comes out, if you can communicate to us what those changes are and how we can better help you, I think that's something that we would ask for, and hopefully that your COs would be receptive to. And with that, I think we've talked a great deal. Are there any questions, anything that we can answer, any examples that you'd like us to touch on? Yes, sir.
One recurring problem that I have observed is that, to put it very bluntly, the core responsibility is given to the lowest guy on the totem pole.
Yeah, it's often
Everywhere.
considered other duties as assigned instead of
You
initial.
bet, and it really, it may be some of the good ones think of it as a developmental assignment, and that's good, they take it seriously. But whatever they bring back to the project office is often not taken seriously, because they're the youngest guy on the team, the newest guy on the team.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pathology I've observed in a lot of agencies, and I wonder if there may be a solution that you guys can see.
I mean, I would say that the role of the Corps is extremely important and should be prioritized. I think I've seen Corps save millions and millions of dollars on contracts through effective administration, whether it's not just reviewing invoices, but also questioning vendors, double checking, triple checking, questioning deliverables. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's often regulated to the lower tier, or it's maybe you do get a high graded Corps, but they also have all these other operational responsibilities. But especially on IT contracts, I think the role of the Corps is very important, and especially in acquisitions where there is a large contractor team working with a very small federal team. The oversight is an integral part, right? So one of the contracts I've had before was 10 federal employees to about 400 contractors. And if you don't have a Corps on that project managing it, I mean, you're going to pay a lot more. Let's just say that.
I think one of the things that they've instituted that's supposed to help that is the FAC Corps certifications, and making sure that people have the training, but with any training, you can sit somebody down and have them walk through it all, but the other part of that is they need to have X number of years experience. So as long as your agency is treating that seriously, you'll start to get a little bit more of your senior folks in it. Only in the federal government would we assign somebody who's been in the office for 2 weeks to oversee a $100 million contract. And it happens everywhere. It's not that that person's not great, it's not that they're not smart, but odds are they're not equipped to best treat it for you, so therefore you as the PM will then naturally devalue the Corps' function and step in and do more of it yourself. I think,
Or that person is completely disconnected from what's actually going on, right?
And they're just
we've
paying
seen
the
it-
invoice.
So we've seen it before where maybe it's a secretary, maybe it's somebody, maybe all the work is happening in, I don't know, Denver, and the Corps is in Austin, and there's no communication, and as a result, there's little insight into what's going on and effectively managing. So, I mean, yeah, I think it needs to be prioritized. They need to be an integral part of the team and actually reviewing the deliverables that are being produced.
the other suggestion that in this, and then we can wrap up for the afternoon. The other suggestion from the IRS standpoint is, in order to value the Corps and encourage people to take it, some form of recognition within your office, whether you put them in for commissioner awards, whether you put them in for special act awards. If you can get your managers to try to incentivize your better people to not want to avoid the Corps work, or, hey, listen, I was a Corps for 3 years. I already paid my dues.
Yeah.
I'm not going back and doing it again. Charlene's new. We just made her sit through all this training. She's the new Corps on our biggest project. It's going to be great. Don't worry, she's got it covered. The only way we're going to change it is to change that dialogue of, hey, boss, not for nothing. I'd like to do this because I think we can actually save some money here and we can do this better. But if we don't start recognizing, because at the IRS, like I said, pendulum swing, we're starting to go back to full-time Corps. So they're disconnected from our program office, but that's their full-time job. But in a lot of places, I'm a management analyst. I do this core stuff because you sent me to training, I have my little certificate, and my boss tells me to go in every month and pay the invoice. Unless you value that other duty as assigned, unless you're evaluating them on it, unless you're giving them an outstanding because they did it, that's a cultural change you have to make in your office. And I'd love to sit here and say the IRS is doing a wonderful job at it. We're not. We're doing the same bad job as you were probably doing in your agency, and if you have ways to improve, we'd love to hear about it too, because as the federal government overall shrinks and we get smaller and we get asked to do more with less, to do less with less, to have our pay frozen, to do all these things that are wonderful for us as federal employees, we need to find ways to recognize the truly amazing work that everyone does. And that's not just your office, then it's not just what we do on a daily basis, it's your customers, it's the people you work with. There are people within the federal government carrying 2 and 3 people's jobs because they've never filled the FTEs. And if core responsibilities aren't something that are looked on favorably or well within your organization, then maybe it's time that there's a Corps of the Year that gets an award. It costs the agency nothing to send them down and have them get to meet your commissioner or your secretary, and you make it a competition that people actually get involved in. But unless you value it, it will always be Susie's problem because she just walked in and she doesn't know anything about what we do. So why don't we have her sit and take all this training? And then I'll help her write the experience so she gets through, because, managing the deal at Home Depot when she was in high school, that's oversight of contract employees, so we can justify a year's worth of experience there, and she can get a FAC core level 2. Until we change that dialogue, we're never going to change how we see it. Anything else?
I did have one more quick point. Another,
Never, Ken.
we're almost done. Another risk that you guys should look out for, and especially in IT acquisitions and in PMs, I see it a lot, is executives and program managers not sort of viewing contractors as sort of personal services or employees of a program. So, when I sort of crossed the fence and came over the program manager role.
When people start talking about personal services, I
Yeah.
move away.
Yeah. We had an executive who really viewed the contract support that they were receiving as an extension of staff and would direct them as such. And it was a big learning curve to try and educate about, look, you're paying them to deliver support, not necessarily direct them. There has to be quality assurance internal to that vendor. It's not, you don't manage them yourself. So it popped up in my head during the last responses is you need to make sure that your correctly using contractor employees and not just viewing them as ad hoc staff.
I've known David for 11 years, and I've never gotten the last word in. I'm going to get it in today. Thank you all for sitting through this, and I hope you learned something, and I hope we weren't too boring up here. I apologize if we were. Thank you so much.